All right, folks, we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, but we're not here for me. If everyone can find your seats, we do have a full house, so hopefully people are open to sharing. Our servers will be walking around taking orders throughout the night, so feel free to, just wave a hand if you need someone. So, just to start, I want everyone to take a look at the screen and take a deep breath and think of a woman of color who has changed your life. For me, a lot of that exposure has been through books. And I think images of beloved women of color who are leaders in this movement, many movements, we should take a chance to think about everything they've done for the world and also everything they've done for us personally. On behalf of Busboys and Poets, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation between our author, Vanessa Priya Daniel, and Thank you for coming out here all the way from Washington. We're so glad to have you. And she will be in conversation with President/CEO of the Solutions Project, Gloria Walton. Two very impressive women we have here today, talking about Vanessa's latest book, UNRIG the Game, What Women of Color Can Teach Everyone About Winning. This book is described as for women of color leaders, a balm, a sister circle, and a masterclass for everyone. It is an essential tool to realize the world we all deserve. I know all of us right now are worrying about whether or not we can achieve that world, and I think it's a really good time to have an expert in the room showing us a little glimpse of hope. Just a reminder that there will be a Q&A after the talk, and you can purchase books over here, although I think most of you have already done so. Thank you very much. And just a last reminder for those people tuning in online that if you want to order a book, you can email bookevents@busboysandpoets.com to do so, and we can get those signed copies to you through the mail. Just a quick intro to start us off. We have esteemed movement elder Adisa Douglas to say a few words, but first, I would like to read you all a little bit of her bio because it is very impressive, and this woman deserves acknowledgement. Also, when she gets up here, everyone look at her sweatshirt, it's great. Adisa Douglas was in the field of philanthropy for 43 years. Her work focused primarily on supporting grassroots organizations working on racial, social, and economic justice issues. She was known for advocating to bridge the gap between funding and the needs of people of color advocacy and organizing. Starting in the 80s, while working for Joint Foundation Support, she was a leader in helping funders recognize and support the critical and groundbreaking work being done by women of color, both at the national and community levels. She was one of the creators of the National Network of Grant Makers Conference on Women of Color. She organized and co-authored with Sasha Hori, the Miss Foundation for Women, and the publication Women of Color, Building Bridges Between Resources and Needs. As a program officer at the Public Welfare Foundation, Adisa supported many women of color organizations, providing funding, technical support, and encouragement, and linking them to other organizations and networks. She facilitated public welfare's funding of women of color and reproductive justice work and advocated for such support with other funders. She's now retired. Deservedly so. And is a local Washington, D.C.tonian. So I would now like to pass the mic over to Adisa to start us off with a few words. Everyone, give another round of applause. A little more volume, please, DJ. Let's do one more round of applause. Well deserved. Well deserved.
turn it over smooth. Yeah. I practiced that. I wanted to show off. I'm almost 81. In 2 months I'll be 81. And so I've had a lot of physical challenges, particularly with balance, but I've been working very hard on, getting my strength back and my balance back. So I did that. When I was thinking about, can everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay. What a beautiful room this is, first of all. Her spirit is all up in here around us. She's in wherever she is, California, Germany, Puerto Rico, Bolivia, wherever she is, she's still here. It's just amazing. When I walked in here, I thought, oh, wow, this is awesome. When I was thinking about what I would say to introduce the program, I started thinking about how long I was a woman of color leader in philanthropy. Not just anything, just philanthropy alone. And I realized it was 48 years. And that means I did that almost 5 decades. No wonder I'm tired and want to retire. And I had a partner, Bernice Johnson Regan, who I had in quotes because she is very much with me. But she truly believed in what I was doing. And she was a huge supporter of the work I was doing. And she could see the behind the scenes, how hard it was, what I was doing. Getting funders, working in white philanthropy to fund women of color, people of color. We were, in the early 1990s, we formed an organization called People of Color Caucus of the National Network of Grantmakers. And the we was Dana Austin, my dear friend, fierce environmental justice advocate and funder, Dan Barmberry, a Native American activist, and myself. And so we were having maybe third or fourth conference. And so we had conferences before the meeting. You know how you do that? I'll carve out some space. And so this was our third one. And we had all gathered. Some of us were gathering early to set the room up. And so Dana and I and a woman named Judy Hatcher, who was from Boston at that time, we were setting the room up, and we kind of knew what we were doing. And I had in mind what I was doing. And we had talked to a lot of people ahead of time. Anybody of color I saw coming to the conference, I stopped it and said, you got to come to the caucus. So, and then there was this huge thing about this is only for funders. And people who are speaking, who've come all the way here to be a resource to us, they can't come in the meeting. This is funders meeting. And so I said, oh no, we need you. Of course you're coming. And I did that with everybody. I walked everywhere talking to everybody who thought that they weren't supposed to come. And so I set the room up, and all of us went off to get some tea and coffee and try to get ready to start. I come back, and this man who self-identified as a black gay man was moving the chairs. We had the chairs set up in a circle. I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm moving the chairs. We have to have this smaller. We can't have such a big space. We can't have a big circle like this. It's not going to be enough people. You're going to feel very small. This is not going to work. It's too much space. I said, what are you talking about? And by that time, people started coming in. I said, would you please just, never mind. And I said, never mind. So people started coming in. We couldn't argue anymore. So people kept coming in, and people kept coming in. And so, the circle was there, and the circle was filling up, duh. And then at one point, people had to start moving chairs while the program was going on. Our discussion was going on, and every time we looked around, we were getting distracted because people were moving, shuffling chairs so that the people could come in and find a seat. And the circle kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I was like, duh, I sort of know what I'm doing. So after the program was over, the meeting was over, Dana, my dear friend, came up to me and said, Adisa, that was amazing. That is the best meeting ever. It was so great to have everybody in the room. And the organizers, the funders, you know, there was no difference. It was wonderful. And then she stopped, and she looked at me, and it's one of those Dana looks and said, okay, but I have something else to tell you. So she took my hand, and she said, Adisa, you and I, as Black women in this world of white philanthropy, have to learn to trust ourselves and to believe in ourselves. And if we see something bigger than somebody else, well, that's their problem. Never let anybody do that to you again. Never let them make the circle smaller. And I never forgot that. So I was one of the manuscript readers of this book, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't put it down. And when I actually got the book, I was so excited. I said, I'm reading it as a real book. It was so exciting. And I realized, oh my God, this book is for me. If I had had this book when I was doing this work, it would have made my life so different. So all of you have this book as you're doing the work. Vanessa is one of my dearest friends and protege, and I am so proud of her. The road that she's traveled has been difficult. All of us have had roads that are difficult, but we get up, we keep up and we keep going, and that's what she did. So when I was reading the book, I wanted to just take the thing, go somewhere and get a sticker and put it up on my walls, and just put this one on the wall, and that one in the bathroom, and this one over here in the kitchen. I wanted to put these things, these words of wisdom all around me. This book is so powerful, and that's what it's going to make you feel. I want to just keep these things, these messages with me. The women who were interviewed for this book are astounding. I'm just so proud that we have women of color doing this kind of work. I'll end with, I met a Native American elder woman, and in my course of my work, and I asked her why was she doing the work of organizing young women, Native women, and girls. And she stopped, and I stopped, and we looked at each other. And she said, Adisa, I looked behind me, and I didn't see anybody coming. So let me tell you, not only do we see the next generations coming, and I'm a third generation of this work, not only do we see that, they're coming, but they are kicking butt. They have a vision far beyond what we had, certainly what I had when I started. I am so proud of these next generations who see a non-binary world, who see a world with peace and freedom, way beyond anything I would have expected. They are here, and they are moving forward. Thank you very much, and I welcome Gloria and Vanessa.
Adisa, thank you so much. That was really beautiful. I have a few quick introductory words about our two interlocutors. No one's here to see me, so I'll be very quick. Gloria Walton, an award-winning community organizer, writer, speaker, and the president and CEO of the Solutions Project, which is a nonprofit that funds and amplifies climate justice solutions created by frontline communities building power for an equitable and regenerative economy. Thank you so much, Gloria. She's been described as one of the country's most exciting next-generation political leaders and named new president to watch, and one of the 50 most powerful women in philanthropy by Inside Philanthropy. Like Adisa said, the next generation, we're coming, we're doing. I'm not, but they are. And Vanessa Priya Daniel, our author, has worked in social justice movements for 25 years as a labor and community organizer and funder. She founded and served for 17 years as executive director of Groundswell Fund, a leading funder of women of color-led grassroots and electoral organizing, which is so hard. Oh my gosh. And she's a recipient of the Smith College Medal, was featured by the Chronicle of Philanthropy as one of 15 influencers who are changing the nonprofit world, and by Inside Philanthropy as one of the top 100 most powerful players in philanthropy. She has written for the New York Times and other publications, and she's going to tell us about her book tonight. So without further ado, please welcome our two ladies.
Hey, DC. Hey. How are y'all feeling? Oh, it's such a good community vibe. Don't we need this right now? Oh, we need this. Thank you all so much for coming out for this conversation on a Tuesday. I want to begin with a few notes of gratitude, and I want to start with Adisa Douglas. Y'all, there are no words for how much I love this woman, who has dedicated her whole life to social justice, who has been my mentor for over 20 years. Adisa, thank you for believing in me before I could believe in myself. Thank you for your example. And there's been so many times when I'm facing something that is difficult, when just thinking about the question, what would Adisa do, has helped me. There's been so many moments where I had to rise to a challenge, where I heard your voice with me saying, you don't walk in any room alone. You're not walking in any room alone, and I feel your support with me. So just thank you, I love you, and it's such a gift to have you in my life. I want to thank also our co-sponsors of the event today, starting with the National LGBTQ Task Force. Shout out to Kiara Johnson, and it's such an honor to serve as their co-chair of their board. I want to thank the Solutions Project, and the Women's Media Center, and all above all, and the National Women's Law Center. Thank you for making this such a success. And then Gloria, I do want to thank you. I know we haven't started talking yet, but you know, we're both like Gen X organizers who, yes, all right, Gen X the house. We both started out as organizers in California, you in South Central, me in the Bay, and then we followed in the path that was cleared by our elders, like Adisa, to go into social justice philanthropy. And you know, we have survived a lot of hits in leadership, and we have supported each other through a lot of hits. Yes. And it is just like such an honor to be in conversation and to be committed with you to making sure that leadership positions are not this broken for the sisters who come after us. Right. So, yeah.
Well, honey, I am happy to be here with you tonight. And I just want to thank all of you for being here with us and joining us in conversation to celebrate my sister Vanessa Daniel book, Unrig the Game. Unrig the Game, baby. So I'm not surprised, but y'all may be a little surprised. So I lit a candle. I have some water here in a glass that has fruit on it to be symbolic. I have some angel stones here and put out some beads, just in case for people in the back who may not be able to see it. And when we started with the slideshow, this is all about an invocation, y'all. So we're here, and our energy means everything, and it's palpable in this room. And the other thing that's important, to your point, is to make sure that we have all the people, living, ancestors, elders, who we need to have our back tonight and who we need to cover us on this journey. We want to call them in here tonight. So V, first I want to thank you for including me as one of the voices in your phenomenal book. Ms. Adisa set that up very well. Ms. Adisa also invoked some ancestors and some living legends, and I feel like that slideshow had a lot of beautiful people as well. And so a few were Miss Bernice Johnson-Regan, Miss Adisa, as we know, is here with us tonight. Miss Angela Davis was already invoked. And I want to ask you, V, who in your life has inspired you, given you hope, courage, and vision that's living, an elder, an ancestor that you'd like to invoke today? And you can just say their name.
Yeah. Well, I guess who's coming to me right now is actually the spirit of our movement ancestor, Yuri Kochiyama. And I'm thinking about her and how she was a model of solidarity and how she reminded us that we have to always remember that we belong to each other. Yeah.
Beautiful. And I'm quickly going to invoke my grandmother and my mom. And so that's Naomi Moment and Belinda Jordan. My grandmother is an ancestor. My mom is still living. But those are the two that instilled a lot of values in me to see myself as a beautiful, capable young Black girl. And I'm going to ask all of you if you can think to yourselves who you would like to invite in this room with us, an ancestor, elder, or living that may not be in this room tonight that you want to invite in. And your thought will be their invitation to join us, and their spirit will be here with us tonight. So I'll take a moment for that. And so for all of our elders in the room, our living legends in this room, we want to say that we appreciate you, we see you, and we thank you. And thanks again for joining us tonight. So let's start talking about this book. So tonight, we're going to get deep, y'all. And one of the things that we're going to talk about is the expectation of being a mammy. And neither one of us look like a mammy up here, right? But those are the times. And the compounding challenges that we face as women of color. And most importantly, we're going to talk about how we win. So before we get started, though, I always like to bring a little levity in the room. We have our ancestors here with us offering us safety and protection. And V didn't know about this, so all I'm going to be doing is asking some really simple questions. They're going to be mostly, there's going to be one that's going to be a twist at the end, but mostly they're going to be either or. And you just pick whatever is resonant and comes to mind. And this just gives us an opportunity to have a little bit of flavor of who V is in a different kind of way.
Uh-oh. Stream of consciousness? Okay.
Sunrise or sunset?
Sunrise.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Spicy or sweet?
Spicy.
And I love this call and response in the room because we want to know who's in the room. Are you a morning bird or a night owl?
Night owl.
Waterfront, coastal shoreline, or the mountains, or the forest, woods, and trees?
Oh, the waterfront, for sure.
Lipstick or sweatpants?
Sweatpants.
Lipstick? And you know it's lipstick all day for me, so look. And sci-fi, fantasy, or romance?
Romance.
Ah! Look, all of us are like, ah! And this last one, so this is a little twist. I'm gonna give you a moment to think about it. But if UNRIG the game had a theme song, what would it be?
Okay. No More Drama, Mary J. Blige. But you know, it's like that song, I do believe that Miss Mary J. actually had like a little hidden message for us, women of color leaders in that. Because listen to the lyrics of that song. Y'all help me out. Broken heart again, another lesson learned. Better know your friends, or else you will get burned out on the job.
Oh, so since Unrig the Game is all about disrupting all the drama, let's get started. So tell me, why did you write this book and decide to interview 45 women of color leaders for it?
Well, this book is a call to radically shift how we see and think about women of color leaders in our movements. I wrote it because I want our movements to win. And I want us to win like I want my two daughters, who are 6 and 13, to have self-determination over their bodies, to have a planet to live on, and to have a democracy to live in. And I am very clear that there is no team that is serious about winning that benches its MVPs for no good reason, particularly in the clutch moment of a big game. And we are in the fight of our lives right now against fascism. We need our full strength. And much of that strength comes from our best and brightest leaders in movement, so many of whom are women of color. And so I know I don't need to tell like a DC room that women of color have always led in our movements, particularly black women who have been the backbone of movements in this country. Yet we have never had a serious discussion in the public square about how much more we could all be winning if we truly valued the strategic brilliance that they are bringing, and if we stop making leadership positions so treacherous for them. So this book is cracking open that conversation. Now, I'm gonna pause for a minute because I don't know if some of you are struggling with my sports metaphors, but I know like Philly was okay last night. I don't totally gauge DC. I know Oakland had a real hard time, but you know, I had to say, like, when I say that no team that's serious about winning benches its MVPs, what I'm really saying is no spiritual practitioner, okay, follow me, who's serious about setting intentions does that without their best mantras, okay? So the conversation this book is cracking open is this, about leadership. And I knew when I sat down to write it that I didn't have all the answers. I've had a lot of success in leadership. I've also skinned my knees plenty, and I have a lot of humility about how much I'm still learning. But what I did have were relationships with many incredible leaders who I knew collectively would have many of the answers, and who trusted me enough to level with me about what their experiences had been. Many of these sisters I have known for 15, 20, 25 years. Some of them I have known from the time I was a young organizer, looking up to them as my elders. Some of them I've known as my peers during the years I was in ED, sitting across kitchen tables, talking about what kept us up at night. Some I've known through the years that I supported over 100 women of color-led organizations when I ran a foundation. So sitting down with elders like Dolores Huerta, sitting down with elders like Adisa and her late partner Bernice Johnson-Reagan, with national leaders like Ashley Woodard Henderson and Linda Sarsour, with elected officials like Pramila Jayapal, down to these beautiful young ones who are leading encampments for Gaza in places like Columbia University, was just an absolute masterclass for me. And it was also good medicine, because I don't know how you all are feeling, but you know, we feel tired in these times, right? And I have to say, after these conversations, I felt so energized and I felt ready to roll up my sleeves for what's ahead. So I hope that the book is bringing that to you all. I did my best to do their wisdom justice in the book, and to offer some of my own reflections as well from nearly 20 years in leadership. And the book is really answering 3 questions. It's answering what makes so many women of color MVPs of social change in this country, what's benching us, and what can we all do about it. So those are the things that the book digs into.
So I want to jump right into the first 2 that you just mentioned, back to the kind of the sports metaphor with MVPs. What makes women of color MVPs?
Well, I think what makes anyone an MVP of anything is really two qualities. The first is how many points they put on the board for their team. The second is outstanding skills and abilities. So if we tell the truth, so many of the points that progressives count on our side of the scoreboard would not exist if women of color had not put them there. We have 30 million kids in this country who don't learn hungry because of black women who started the Black Panther Breakfast Program, which catalyzed what became free and reduced breakfast and lunch in our nation's public schools. There are 8 million families in this country who benefit from in-home and community-based care because leaders like Ai-jen Poo and Alicia Garza and the domestic workers fought like hell for it to be included in the American Rescue Plan. And as bad as things are right now, imagine how much worse it would be, y'all, if we hadn't had 4 years to take a breath between Trump administrations. Well, that breath was brought to us by black women organizing in tough states like Georgia and being flanked by Latinas and Native women in places like the Southwest and Asian Pacific Islander women and Arab women in places like Michigan to create the margin of victory that defeated Trump in 2020. So points on the board matter. Okay, let's talk about skills and abilities for a minute. So I mentioned I have a 13-year-old daughter. This was a few years ago, maybe when she was 8. And I was driving her to her swim meet practice, and she was still little enough where she had to sit in the back seat. So I'm talking and looking at her in the rearview mirror. And I remember what we were talking about, but I was explaining something using the metaphor of Moses and the parting of the Red Sea. And you know, our family, I would say, were spiritual, but they weren't raised in the church. So some of these stories are new to her. So I said, well, you know, the water's parted. She said, what do you mean water's parted? I said, well, the water's separated. She said, well, how do you separate a liquid? So we went round and round like this. And finally I said, I don't know. Like the water moved to one side and it moved to the other and you could see the land and the people could walk to freedom. And her eyes lit up in the back in the rearview mirror and she said, you mean like Moana? And I said to myself first, okay, it's one thing they're not in the church, but we got to do a little bit more scaffolding around world religions. But to her, I said, yeah, baby, kind of like Moana, but also like Harriet Tubman. Remember, we call her Moses. Remember how she took people through the woods? Like she made a way out of no way. And I think about this conversation a lot because that is the essence of what so many women of color leaders do in movement. We make a way out of no way. We make the impossible possible. I also think about this because this small exchange with my kid times 100 is what it often felt like in all the years in philanthropy to try to explain to people the brilliance of this leadership. Because people will ask you their version of the question, what do you mean you can part water? They will say, what do you mean it's possible to tackle things like patriarchy and white supremacy and colonialism and extractive capitalism, not one by one, but simultaneously? And you have to explain, yeah, it's possible. You know, Kimberly Crenshaw called the experience of all those forces intersectionality. The Combahee River Collective talked about it. Cherie Moraga wrote about it. And women of color have been about it when we fight not just for fair wages, but for racial and gender equity in pay. Not just for health care, but for reproductive and gender-affirming health care. I call it 360 vision, the organizing praxis of moving in a way strategically where you're tackling all these interlocking forces of oppression that hurt all of us. What do you mean it's possible to part water? People will ask you, what do you mean it's possible to be bold and have backbone and not just drive to the mushy political middle in order to win? It's possible. It's called demanding the fullness of what our communities need to thrive and what our planet needs to be livable. Yes. And it is such an antidote to this affliction of timidity that fascists rely on to get all of us to obey in advance. Boldness looks like the squad as the left flank in Congress. Boldness looks like our sister right here from DC, Fatima Goss Graves, standing up in public a couple weeks ago and saying, you know what, the National Women's Law Center will never abandon transgender women. Boldness looks like the sisters who were behind the Green New Deal. We know that Rihanna Gunn Wright, a black woman, wrote it. AOC, a Latina, was its first champion in Congress. Varshini Prakash, a South Asian woman, organized youth in the Sunrise Movement to push at the grassroots for it. And then when it stalled out, It was Pramila Jayapal as head of the Congressional Progressive Caucus who locked arms with the grassroots, with sisters in Congress, and made sure that key elements of the Green New Deal made it into the Inflation Reduction Act. That is the reason that we know that the largest outlay of dollars for climate change and addressing it in this country includes major dollars for the most vulnerable communities. Boldness is possible. What do you mean we can part water? They'll say, what do you mean it's possible to fight in a way that doesn't leave, that doesn't throw certain communities under the bus, right? It's possible. This is possible. I call it generosity. You know, it is that conviction to say we are not going to leave immigrants or our trans kids or pregnant people or any group behind in order to win. And this kind of solidarity jams the gears that fascism really relies on in order to advance. This solidarity looks like what we saw up in Oregon with the Reproductive Health Equity Act. This is one of the best laws we have on the books for reproductive freedom in this country, where women of color sat at that negotiating table and would not agree to move forward unless trans folks and undocumented people were protected in that law. So generosity is possible. These three superpowers, 360 vision, boldness, generosity, they're what women of color use in our movements to part the waters of injustice so that everyone can walk to freedom. Now, they're not innate. They're not present in every leader who is a woman of color, because Nikki Haley, Candace Owens. They're also not absent from every leader who's not a woman of color, but they are disproportionately present among women of color because of what we have had to navigate to survive. The other thing I want to say about them is they're not about saving anybody. We can take the most glib pop culture example. The palace was always going to be worse for Meghan Markle. If she hadn't gotten out to save her own neck, Prince Harry might still be back there drinking tea in the sunken place. So his freedom was a happy byproduct of her saving her own neck. So these are the superpowers. These, points on the board, superpowers, outstanding skills and abilities are what make women of color MVPs.
Boom. Okay. So, yes. Now, you said a lot there. And, when I'm thinking about this 360 vision, which I like to call quantum intelligence, just to kind of invoke spirit into it. And you're talking about boldness and generosity. Our superpowers, why are we benched? I want to hear your perspective about what's benching us.
Yeah. And you would think, right? I mean, if so many women of color are MVPs, if so many of us have these superpowers, shouldn't we be thriving?
Should we be thriving?
And then we think about what we just saw happen to Joanne Reed. Talk about an MVP of journalism, talk about a standard of excellence and integrity in her craft. And then we remember what Bell Hooks taught us, that sometimes people try to destroy you precisely because they recognize your power. Not because they don't see it, but because they see it and they don't want it to exist. We've seen over the past 25 years, the greatest ascension of women of color into the top leadership positions in movement organizations in the history of this country. We've witnessed a lot of victories come out of that, and we've also witnessed the beating that these leaders have taken. Because you see, we were invited into leadership kind of like Jackie Robinson was invited into the majors. We were treated differently from our white and male counterparts from the start. And that different treatment wasn't just coming from the right wing, it was coming from within our own movements, and a lot of times from within our own organizations. My friend Ashley Henderson calls it the sensation of flying a plane while being shot at from the outside and the inside. So what makes it feel like this? Well, in the book, I have something called the job description, which lays out the long list of things that women of color leaders are expected to do and put up with in leadership positions. I also have a section called We Are Not a Monolith, which talks about how we're not all the same, and people actually come for the necks of black women in a different way than they come for the necks of Asian women and Latinas and so forth. But I want to talk right now about the top 5 that I heard the most in the interviews, that were the most universal things that bench us. Number 1, the invitation onto a glass cliff to lead an organization in crisis. Number 2, the assumption of incompetence.
You're on fire, girl.
Number 3, the expectation to mother and mammy. Number 4, being given 0 to no margin for error. And number 5, when you're attacked, you're abandoned. So let me talk for a minute about what these look like in some of the stories I heard. Okay, invitation onto a glass cliff looks like the story I heard from a leader out of California. She was hired into a CEO position. A few weeks into the job, the controller comes into her office and says, "There's not enough money in the bank to make payroll at the end of the month." No one had told her this before she took the job. So she works round the clock for months, weathering her own health in order to rectify the problem, knowing the whole time that even though she didn't create this problem, more than any other leader, she is going to be the one who's blamed for it. A glass cliff is having to either work your black or brown girl magic or take the fall for someone else's mess. It also, by the way, looks like Kamala Harris being asked to mount a campaign with less time than any other candidate. Assumption of incompetence looks like the requirement that we work 4 times as hard to be seen as half as credible, and how that weathers our bodies, our minds, and our spirits. Amen. One of the most poignant stories that I heard was from a brilliant organizer and leader out of Chicago, Amisha Patel, who told me that during her first battle with cancer, that she worked through chemo and radiation. She was in a New York City bathroom outside of a work meeting when her hair started to fall out. And she stood in that bathroom and held clumps of it in her hand and wept. She knew it was coming, but she didn't feel like she could slow down. Gloria, you shared with me that you worked at one point for 13 years without a real vacation, until you ended up in the ER with chest pain. I went through my own version of this with a severe back issue, would not slow down, facilitated my board retreat from the floor, stood up on cross-country flights. Underneath that was the fear that if I didn't continue to produce excellence, that I would be discarded by movement, that maybe my good work that I cared so much about would crumble, that perhaps I wouldn't even be able to support and feed my family, my kids. Assumption of incompetence weathers us. Now let's talk about the expectation to mother and mammy, because there was no other issue that was a bigger pain point or lightning rod with nearly 50 people that I interviewed for this book. What this looks like is being cast as mean or aggressive for normal levels of assertiveness that would be accepted from any other leader. It's being told that you are cold or unfeeling anytime you say no. It's the expectation not just that you deliver a workplace that is fair or that is just or that is sustainable, but that you deliver a utopia where no one ever feels a trigger or no one ever feels discomfort. And then the punishment that is meted out in the public square when you fail to deliver on this impossible standard. It also looks like the demand that you perform vulnerability so that people feel less uncomfortable with the specter of a woman of color standing in her power. One of the stories I heard was from a leader in the reproductive justice movement who left leadership altogether because her staff kept clamoring for her to be more vulnerable. Her annual reviews were filled with comments that said, "She is so visionary. She is such an excellent fundraiser. She's a sound strategist, but you know what? She never cries." It wasn't enough that she was doing her job. People needed her to get emotionally naked. Another sister, Purvi Shah, who runs the Movement Law Lab, talks about a previous job where she was working to hold someone accountable for behavior that was beyond any level of decorum, only to be told by her boss, "Maybe you're just not nurturing them enough." And then there was this story that came out of a voter engagement conference that I went to, where a Afro-Latina sister was giving a presentation about voter suppression and showing a short of our movement ancestor, Fannie Lou Hamer, talking about her experience in the Jim Crow South and in prison. And 2 non-black Latinas cut the feed on the video. Why? Because they were so shell-shocked for all the times people had come for their necks for some piece of content that triggered people that they were preempting it to try to protect themselves. By cutting off content that we all need to hear, voter suppression is not over. So this expectation to mother and mammy distracts us. Zero margin for error looks like what we all saw happen to Claudine Gay. The error doesn't need to be real, it can just be perceived. And then lastly, the abandonment when attacked looks like what happened to the leaders of the original Women's March. We know that there were 4 of them, but only the 3 who were women of color were singled out for attack ads from the NRA that incited people to threaten their lives. Then they were dragged all over the internet behind false rumors and accusations. And when it was happening, they reached out to people in movement. People wouldn't return their calls. They said people treated us like we were radioactive, like we were guilty or hysterical or both. Until a year later, when the New York Times broke the story that it had actually been Russian bots behind that dragging that were attempting to cleave the women's movement. So this, you know, y'all, as human beings, we are all hardwired to have a visceral fear of being left out on the hill to die. Yes. And I talked to sisters who have been through this abandonment, some of whom had checked themselves into inpatient treatment centers for PTSD, some of whom hadn't left their homes for the better part of a year. When I listen to these stories, I couldn't help thinking of the words of feminist writer Carolyn Jess Cook, who said, "Why were we taught to fear the witches and not the people who burn them alive?" So these are the barriers. It's heavy, but I came out of this process with a lot of hope about how much power we have to actually correct these things and unrig these things.
You're on fire, honey. And that's why I had to cool you down, okay? We love it. So I'm trying to think of this next question. You know Denise Perry.
Yes.
So Denise runs this organization, and she's like amplified this organization called BOLD, Black Organizing for Leadership and Dignity. Yes, we love BOLD. I'm one of the founding advisors to BOLD. And you know, I went through this course there. They do a lot of generative somatics. It's a leadership program, but it interweaves generative somatics, which is really powerful. So I had my first somatic break with this one exercise that was all about the protection and support that you need. So you're kind of in the center of a circle, which already invokes vulnerability, especially for an introvert like me. So you're in the middle of this circle, everyone's around you, and you're supposed to pull people who you want to kind of be your protectors. And the people who are going to make you feel safe, and you position them however they're going to make you feel safe. So I pulled 3 people, put them in the front, and they were looking outward. So they're facing you, I'm kind of facing you as well, they're looking at you. Then I pulled 2 other people and put them on my side, also facing out. And then I pulled 3 people and put them in the back. 2 facing out, the ones on the end, and the one in the middle, I had her put her hand gently on my shoulder and just touch me to let me know that they're there. So this was the first time, I didn't know what to expect from this exercise, but that was my first time really understanding what somatics is all about. So you're supposed to sit there and kind of be in position, feeling the energy that you've positioned all around you, feeling their protection, feeling the safety, feeling the release and the relief. And as I was doing that, my body started to tremble. I broke down into the ugly cry up in a room, in the middle of this room, right? Everyone's around me witnessing something I have never in my life experienced. When I tell you I was trembling out of control, and it lasted for a while, but that's setting up this next question, because I want to ask you, you know, we talk about the support that women of color leaders want. And I know you talk to a lot of us about what and how we want others to show up for us. And one of the things that I realized with that exercise was I was so used to being the person looking out, the person on the side, the person in the back, the person doing the gentle touch, that I have never in my life felt that kind of protection and holding that I felt that day. And this was symbolic, you know? But to think if I had that kind of protection around me, that kind of support around me, that kind of encouragement, talking about 360, you know, around me. And that, you know, I'm still speechless and trying not to cry thinking about it. But that was the moment that I said, okay, this is what's missing for us all the time, but we are always showing up like that for everybody else. Everybody else.
And how old were you when you had that moment?
Oh, this wasn't maybe that was a decade ago now.
Mm-hmm. So you were already like maybe
So
15
maybe
years into the work,
Yeah.
at least. Yeah.
Yeah. And never felt that kind of
Wow.
symbolic support before, let
Yeah.
alone real.
Yeah. I just think about like what it would have been like if you had gotten that earlier, you know, during those 13 years that you weren't taking vacation.
Ugh.
What would that have been like?
I wonder too.
Yeah. And how would all of our health be different?
And how would all of our health be different? Mental, physical, spiritual, all the things.
Yeah. Well, I think this is the important question because we can't unrig this stuff on our own. How many folks are women of color in this room? Just out of curiosity. Identify that way. Okay.
So beautiful.
Okay. Yeah. And so we've got a few allies and co-conspirators in here, which is great. You know, I was back to swim meets. I feel like as a parent, you spend half your time as mommy lift, driving your kids places, and then the other half like sitting at their stuff. But I was at the swim meet, and this other mother had pulled this folding chair off to the side, and she was clearly exhausted. She fell asleep, and her head was back, and her mouth was open, and she had this book across her chest that said, "What to do when he won't change." Okay, my point is, this notion that the people who exhaust women of color in leadership should be allowed not to change while we just study up on how to become better Jedis at navigating all this, it's like I reject and rebuke it. You know, it's magical thinking to even imagine that we could unrig it with that. So we need people to unrig the game for us. And there's a lot of concrete things and examples in the book about that. They really boil down to two things. One is to notice, recognize, and value the superpowers. And the second is to intervene in what gets in the way. There are so many ways to do this systemically and then also just interpersonally and individually. I think systemically, when we see how ubiquitous something like the expectation to mother and mammy is, there is no good reason that this is not commonly understood language in our movements. You know, so we can make sure that staff orientations, handbooks, trainings, political education, the ongoing work we're doing, the culture we're setting, actually inoculates and educates people against the job description that I talk about in the book, against the top 5 things that bench us. You know, as Maya Angelou used to say, you know, when you know better, you do better. I do believe that if many people know better, some people will do better. And so, you know, it doesn't actually take an army. And that's where, you know, also the individual work. I have been in rooms where a single person was trying to discredit a woman of color leader, and the room was turning based on some simple mistake she had made. And just one person raising their hand and saying, hold on a minute, can we put the context of this mistake and everything this sister has accomplished and done right? Can we put this mistake in the context of everything that she's been up against? It has shifted the entire room. I have experienced and been on the receiving end of people intervening with me in the habit of overwork, which I think many of us have developed as an adaptive habit to the assumption of incompetence. You know, when I was refusing to stop working with my back issues, I had my board chair and one of my mentors that like said, you know, we're not asking V, like we're telling you, you need to take some time off, and here's also a way we're gonna cover your work. So I think making sure that firm, insistent support is there, but it's like paired with also support to cover the work is really important. And then just intervening. I think we've all seen just the attacks on many women of color leaders happen in our movements. And, you know, one great example is Linda Sarsour, how she intervened. I don't know if you all remember, but Representative Ilhan Omar was attacked at one point, and they wanted to introduce this House resolution that would have called her anti-Semitic. Yeah, so Linda Sarsour was not having it. She was not leaving Ilhan Omar out on the Hill to be dealing with death threats and everything else on her own. Linda organized 800 people in movement to sign a petition, including many of the heads of the biggest voter engagement shops in the country. And then she got a group to hand deliver that to Nancy Pelosi's office and said, by the way, these are all the people who are knocking doors for you all. And the language of that resolution changed to the language that they proposed. It no longer condemned Ilhan Omar, and it instead took a stance against not just anti-Semitism, but Islamophobia and anti-blackness and other forms of discrimination. So that kind of intervention is possible. But even in the more mundane, petty stuff we see happening online, you know, if you don't even have to rebut someone. You can just say, you know, I've known this leader for X number of years, and that's never been my experience with them. You know, give people another data point. Don't just allow bad actors to be the only voice out there. And this is more important than ever, you know, in a climate of fascism, because when we practice being bystanders to things, when we practice accepting things without proper evidence or data, it's actually training our own people to be sheep, which tills the ground for fascism. We have to, discipline and movement looks like intervening to disrupt that. So those are some of the ways.
Well, I'm appreciating those ways that others can show up for us. And I also really appreciate that in this book, you talk a lot about how we can show up for ourselves. And I know that we're sitting up here all grown and sexy and cute. And at the end of the day, I also know that we're still those little 4-year-old girls who are full of light and joy and freedom. And I want to ask if you would be willing to read one passage of advice to our younger selves. Yes. And I have your book. Okay. And share that with us and reflect on it for a bit. We want to wrap in a few minutes.
Chapter 20, Advice for Our Younger Selves. As I closed out each interview with the leaders I spoke to for this book, I asked them what advice they would give to their younger selves about leadership. 5 responses showed up again and again in their answers. As I read them over, I recalled a lovely member of my staff who once told me she put a picture of herself as a child on her altar where she meditated daily. She said that looking at the picture was a way of remembering to treat her adult self with kindness and compassion. Women of color leaders are so hard on ourselves. When the world is forever siding against you, this can feel like an act of self-preservation. You catch the errors before they do. You protect every vulnerability before they can lampoon you. You dazzle with an excellence so undeniable that they think twice about questioning your competence. Our self-critique can be harsh and even cruel. We do this to protect ourselves from others, but then we are left with another dilemma. Who is going to protect us from ourselves? When leaders responded to this question, their voices softened as they thought about their younger selves and about the young people they are nurturing in their lives today, their daughters, nieces, and mentees. My hope is that women of color in leadership can embrace these 5 pieces of advice with the love and care that every one of us deserves. Trust yourself. Trust your gut, intuition, and big ideas. Tune out the doubt, jealousy, and hate coming from others and learn to hear yourself. Devote time to the things that allow you to clearly hear your inner voice. Build your squad. Find the colleagues and mentors who really know and love you enough to celebrate your success and tell you the truth. Invest time in those relationships. Protect yourself. Keep people with backbone around you. Draw strong boundaries with the things that don't serve your highest purpose, overwork, toxicity, things that are outside of your power to fix, and even with major sacrifices that you do not in your heart really want to make, such as not having kids or giving up an important hobby. Understand that no is a complete sentence and can be said unapologetically. Never abandon yourself or allow yourself to be mistreated. When toxic or abusive behavior is coming your way, cut it off. Shine your light fully and unapologetically. As Ashley Woodard Henderson said, don't pansy around leadership. Walk in your full power, be ambitious, be assertive, put your biggest, boldest vision out there. Know that you are enough. Know you are enough to deserve good people around you, to be treated and to treat yourself with kindness, compassion, and respect, to let go of shame, to claim credit for your good work, to ask for the help you need. You are strong enough to take valuable feedback without spiraling into shame, to take accountability for and learn from your mistakes, and also to forgive yourself.
Thank you, V. So let's close with hope.
Okay.
There's a lot of passages in your book that inspired me, and I felt like they were really hopeful. And a couple that came to mind, I was looking at one that was about your two daughters and the fact that you really want them to have clean water, be able to breathe clean air, and you wanted this for them and their children, and for them to be able to lead safe and fulfilling lives, which is important to me as a climate justice activist. And you also talked about the fact that the obstacles that women of color face in order to survive and thrive, those are the very same obstacles that all people need removed to be free. And I want to ask if there's a passage in the book that gives you the most hope that you'd like to share with us tonight.
It always comes to my kids when it's hope. So. Another spring has come, and my children are growing and blooming along with the flowers we planted together in our yard. Ife bounds from plant to plant in the fairy garden, squealing with delight at each new bud and blossom, remembering the ones we planted in the hard winter ground. Mommy Vanessa, look at this one. Come look, she exclaims. I follow her until we've seen them all and watch her wander to the corner of the yard to chat with the fairies. A neighbor stops to say hello, and I remark offhandedly to her that I think the Japanese elm tree I planted just before the pandemic may not have survived the winter. I think it might be dead, I say, running my fingers over its bone-dry leaves. Ife overhears me and looks stricken. She looks at the tree and begins to weep, really weep, like from the depths of her little soul. I had no idea how much love she felt for this tree. It dawns on me that she is still so whole, so integrated in her being, so much in harmony and right relationship with the earth, other beings, her feelings and magic. She grieves the dead tree and delights in each new flower with her entire heart. She hasn't been fractured by the society and life. Both she and her big sister Kwali have this wholeness. They have so much less trauma than I had at their tender ages. Trisha and I have loved and protected them since they were born with the warmth and ferocity of two lionesses. Wholeness is their birthright. I know they are going to be incredible in whatever they decide to do in life, with even more potent superpowers of 360 vision, boldness, and generosity than previous generations. I want them to do whatever their hearts desire to the absolute fullest. If their passion never brings them into social justice movements and they find other ways to cultivate beauty and joy in the world, that's fine. But if they ever decide to lead and work for social change, I'm clear on one thing. I want them to have exponentially less shit in their way. And I don't want to wait for their future for this. I want it now for the women of color leaders of this moment. The future of democracy and the planet is uncertain, but of one thing I am sure. Humanity has an embarrassment of riches and women of color MVPs of social change. I know the work will always be hard. Changing the status quo always is. Social justice work is going to be treacherous externally due to the backlash of those who cling to the old oppressive systems and fear a freer world. My fervent hope for my sister movement leaders, for my daughters, and by extension for all humanity is that the positions from which leaders do their essential work to change the world will cease to be treacherous internally due to mistreatment from those who work within movements. I wish for every good-hearted woman of color leader to reclaim the massive amount of time and energy we spend every day buffering and navigating archaic stereotypes and expectations, and pivot it into supercharging movements and their ability to win. I want us to win, and I want us to thrive.
You are incredible. That was incredible. Thank you for sharing your gifts with us. We want to open it up to some Q&A right now. That was so rich, V.
Thank you so much.
And we can just Oh, thank you.
Yep, I got a mic, so you can just raise your hand. We'll try to get to as many people as possible. I know you all probably have many questions, but you can just raise your hand and I'll come pass you the mic. See someone right over here. Thanks for starting us up. Oh, you might have to come stand right here if you don't mind. The rain is a little...
Hi, I'm Kaylin Tanner. I'm with All Above All. And, oh, excuse me. Don't do that, sis. That's my good sis. I have been in the reproductive justice movement since I was a college student at Dillard University, a small historically black college in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I'm only 25, but I am literally experiencing and have been experiencing burnout. I love the movement. This is my passion, this is what I want to do. I can't see myself doing anything else. And yes, my colleagues are amazing. My family supports me. I have friends like Leslie that support me in everything I do. But I'm trying to figure out ways to basically try to combat this burnout, but then also find more community to support the work that I'm doing and to support me as not just a person that not just a worker bee, but support me as a whole human being in a sense. So I hope that made sense, but this conversation really filled my cup because a lot of the times I feel like I'm pouring into people and pouring into the movement. And a lot of the times people aren't asking, how are you? And how can I best support you, not just the work that you're doing, but how can I support you as an individual and as a whole? So not sure if you can answer that question or give some type of advice, but would love you to.
Yeah, we'll give it a shot. And I'd love Gloria to chime in on this too, because we both dealt with this early when we were your age in movement. I have to say, like, one of the things that helped me was actually something, Adisa, you told me when I was maybe like early 20s. You said, be careful of people who are going to treat like the bright, shiny thing and extract from you and ask you to be every single place, and be mindful and don't just be accept the idea that you're so delighted just to be able to have the opportunity to be in the room. Like, value your time. Think clearly about what you're saying yes to and what you're saying no to, and know that saying no is important because that leaves you the time for yourself to not burn out, and it leaves you the time to say yes to the things that give you the best comparative advantage, where you really want to let your talents and skills shine. So I think boundaries, letting things sometimes be good enough, really sitting with, Purvi Shah has some really great advice in the book about, we do a lot of over-efforting, so really sit with when you're over-efforting on something, like, where is it coming from? Is it coming from a place of inadequacy or something else, and how to kind of turn the volume up and down on how much we over-effort on things. And then get yourself in the right place in movement. Not every position is right for everybody, right? Some positions, like if you're at the helm of something, it is more intensity, and we have tours of duty in those positions. We don't, have an ED position forever. So think about that. Oh, one last thing I'll say. ED positions, I feel like just the nonprofit structure, which we could have a whole nother conversation about nonprofits and whether the C3 is the most relevant and useful thing in this time. But the singular ED position was really designed an antiquated model for cis white men who could rely on the free labor of their wives at home. So it is not actually designed for even cis men today who are trying to just like be good people in their house and do laundry or whatever, so I think that I think that we need to examine that model. How do we put Kara's dying. But to put support, co-director models are possible. They're not a panacea, of course, but to also put things around leadership positions so that you're not carrying the weight of everything. You have a good right hand, you have a good deputy, you have a good head of development. You're not holding all those functions.
And just for the interest of time, because I want others to ask you questions, what's your name, darling? Caitlin. So I will definitely talk to you once we wrap. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, I saw someone in the back right here. If you can, do you mind coming over in this section right here? The best mic range. Sorry.
Hey, Ife.
Thank you. My name's Ife too, so wonderful hearing another Ife. I'm curious if in the conversations that you had, if folks spoke to, how to step away gracefully when your time is up, when the time is kind of like, what are the markers? How do you know? What are some of the lessons and insights have you heard?
Yeah, I mean, people were in different places, I guess, that I interviewed of deciding to transition. I think that, having hindsight is 20/20, and I think the transitions that I've seen made most successfully, people made them before they were completely exhausted. So, there is something to be said for like quitting while you're ahead and not allowing yourself to get into a place where you are too exhausted to also deal with things that may pop off when you transition. Because people, mothering and mammying, there are reactions when you decide you're leaving. So yeah, there's a couple stories on that in the book, but that's what I would say. Anything to add?
Okay, see someone over here. Pardon my reach.
Hi there. Thank you both for speaking tonight. I'm Diana Alonzo Watkins, and both of you have had this incredible career in philanthropy. And I am a very big critic of philanthropy, but wonderfully,
We are too.
Yeah, for many reasons. I'm on the board for more of a radical fund in DC, but I wanted you to both speak about the state of philanthropy and funding women of color, funding LGBTQ communities, and the direction of resources really are needed by donors and philanthropic institutions.
Yeah. I mean, I think that when we look at fascism and how it advances, you can look around the world. The path to fascism is really built with the eroded rights of three groups: LGBTQ people, women, and oppressed racial and ethnic groups. And every single woman of color in this country is a member of at least two of those groups. And those of us who are queer, which is a lot of us in movement, are members of all three. So we are under very little illusion that the way through this is to keep our heads down and to follow orders. We are highly motivated to fight, and we actually have a lot of experience fighting this kind of threat, because what fascism essentially is it is the worst of America. It's that three-headed monster of patriarchy, white supremacy, and extractive capitalism on steroids. And so it makes sense then that women of color who have been fighting some version of that monster for hundreds of years in this country for our very survival actually have something to teach America about how to fight. So when we see, a Jasmine Crockett or an AOC be uncowed, when we see the kind of fight that's being demonstrated right now, this is a particular stance. And what philanthropy needs to do is understand that the stance of philanthropy is actually one of timidity and obeying in advance and cowardice. And when we think about the moment we're in now historically, we should not be surprised by this moment, by the way. This is a backlash moment. We saw emancipation, there was then Jim Crow. We saw civil rights movement, there was then COINTELPRO and mass incarceration. There is no way that after the largest uprising and protest movement in the history of this country that there was not gonna be this backlash. And every time there's been a backlash, there's been a group of mostly white liberals, led by white liberals, who handled it by saying, let's appease and concede and give the Confederates and give the Bull Connors and give the Trumpers what they want and throw communities under the bus. And that mentality is something that is very laced within philanthropy. And so the transition that philanthropy has to make is actually from a stance of cowardice into one of backbone and courage. And what that looks like is, number one, think about the advisors you're listening to. If you're listening to lawyers and financial advisors who work at Schwab, for what to do, sorry, you need to get some new advisors. Doesn't mean you're being reckless, but as the meme that's going around says, the people who hid Anne Frank were breaking the law, the people who killed her were following it. So people have to have some come to Jesus moments about how they figure out how to get creative. And Lord knows people in philanthropy can get real creative when it's about a tax break. So get creative about being like water and getting money to the front lines of the field. So we can do that, and that means find some leaders and be in their corner. Say, what do you need? You need security? What do you need? I'll be in your corner if you're a donor. Find a set of organizations, be in their corner. If you need to move money offshore, if you need to give up property or land so people have safe houses, so people have places to gather and meet, there's all kinds of ways throughout history that people have done this, and that's grounding in the ancestors of particularly white folks in philanthropy, the folks who were part of the Underground Railroad, the folks who were freedom riders. I mean, that's the kind of history that folks in philanthropy need to ground in, not the history of the sector.
Yes.
Any other questions? Okay, see you back there. I'm hoping the mic will be able to reach you.
Find out. Hi. We're rolling with the mic. All right. Okay. Sorry, took me a second there. Hi, Meyer Galblum-Haig with Disability. We're gonna try further up. Okay, sorry. Meyer Galblum-Haig with the Disability Culture Lab. First off, thank you so much. So brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing tonight. It's so wonderful to be in community with y'all. So much of what you're talking about to me resonates as so incredibly disabling on every single front, and I heard disability sort of echo throughout so much of what you were saying. You're talking about being on the floor, facilitating a board meeting, and talking about just the incredible racism and misogyny and misogynoir and intersecting forms of oppression, all of which are disabling, that women of color are facing in leadership in all these organizations, and of course all of the forms of oppression we're facing and the social movements that are being funded that y'all are talking about in philanthropy. And I was just wondering how you see disability sort of fitting in to that fight, and how it fits, if you will, and what that solidarity looks like. So I saw a few amazing disabled women of color leaders in some of the interviews that you did, and I'd love to hear what wisdom you heard from those folks.
Well, I think that it's so important, just in the spirit of solidarity, for all of us to continue to learn and educate ourselves and figure out how to stand with the disability community. I don't know if folks have seen, but under attack right now is 504, which is, huge. And, we are all only non-disabled and for a limited amount of time until we're disabled, So I think that certainly a lot of the health concerns that women of color have brought up in the interviews have related to that. I myself live with an ongoing issue with back issues too. So I think it's important to understand that there's some cause and effect with some of the weathering, and that's causing more disability among women of color leaders. And then it's important to make sure that as we're integrating all the issues that we're fighting on, that disability rights is a part of that. And I think we do see that across some of the leaders that are in the book. So thank you for the question.
We have time for 1 to 2 more. Any last questions? If I can't see anyone in the back. If not, let's give it up one more time.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. I just want to remind you all one more time that the book is here available for purchase. We only have limited amount of copies left, so don't rush me up here. We'll be able to take orders after the program, so you'll still be able to get a signed copy if we do sell out tonight. I want to thank Vanessa and Gloria one more time for this amazing conversation. And thank you all for joining us. You can watch the live stream recording of this program on our YouTube channel, Busboys and Poets, and it's under Unrig the Game, the title of the book. And thank you all one more time for joining us. We hope to see you again. One more thing. The signing, the way the line is going to work. If you don't mind, I think I'll have you sit just on the stage right here, and we'll form the line going this way, kind of curving. So the books are all signed already, but for personal dedications, this will be the line. And then after you have your book and signing, you can go out this way.
And if folks would be willing, we're doing these big photos at all the stops. We're going to do a selfie this way, so if folks want to stand up and come together, we're going to take a picture.
I was just going to have her sit on the stage right here. They're all signed already. Oh, yeah, of course. If everyone can look this way. If I could have everyone look this way for the photo, the group photo. The lights are kind of in the way. Let me try turning the lights on. Okay. Oh, the projector. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Oh, wait, hold on. They're not. Okay, now go. Okay.